Hey everybody, welcome back to Hints and Guesses. This is Kent Dobson. Welcome to my podcast. It's good to be back. Happy New Year. Happy January. I have a pretty interesting episode here I want to share with you. I want to share with you a conversation that I had with my friends at Eastlake. This is a church in Seattle, a spiritual community that I've taught at a bunch of times, been out there many, many times. And I've done some online things with them since COVID, and they're experimenting a little bit with, instead of kind of the sermon model, what about just a conversation? So you're going to hear in a few minutes a conversation between three of us about ritual and ritual in the modern world, and do we need it, and can we invent it, and are human beings, I always pause here because it's so common to say human beings are wired in a certain way, and I have a lot of resistance to that, but is the human heart and mind and soul and spirit oriented in such a way where ritual and ceremony deepens our experience of our actual lives and of meaning and of the world and of the divine and of the mysteries? And anyway, that's the train we roam around in. It's funny because they asked me to have a kind of 101 conversation about ritual, and I think it is that and more. Not that what I'm saying is so amazing and deep. I just mean the way the conversation unfolds, I think, is surprising and interesting and personally and emotionally meaningful to me, as you'll hear as it unfolds. So just want to welcome you back to the podcast. I got a bunch of episode ideas and some interesting guests coming down the pike here. So I hope you enjoy. And as always, really, really grateful to my Patreon supporters. Thanks for making this happen. Couldn't do it without you. And send me a note, send me an email, send me your ideas, send me your questions. Always greatly appreciated. I hope you enjoy this conversation with my friends at Eastlake.
Well, hey everybody. Hey Eastlake. Thanks for tuning in. This is our first conversation of 2023. I'm Peter. We haven't met before. I'm joined as always by my good friend Kristen. And we're really excited that we get to have, I would call Kent a guest, but I don't even think that's accurate anymore. We're just like a recurring character on the sitcom. Kent Dobson is here with us today. We're really excited to have you join us. Thank you for being here, Kent. Are you joining us from home? Are you in Michigan?
Yep, I'm in Michigan, at home.
Warm and cozy, fire behind you. Just looking so scenic. It's perfect. Before I pepper Kent with questions, Chris and I have been thinking a lot about this discussion. And we're going to have some questions for Kent. That's why we invited him, obviously. I want to do just a little bit of an intro to kind of remind everybody about what we're up to. Hopefully, obviously it's the first conversation of the new year. Happy New Year to everybody. Hopefully you are entering this new year with some hope about what this year might hold for you. But ultimately, we have these conversations, Kristen and I do. Eastlake does these conversations, facilitates these discussions because we really want to help people live a meaningful life. That is kind of the business that we're in. We want people to experience love and purpose. And hopefully, as you're listening to these discussions, you can experience some motivation or inspiration, some tools to navigate the stresses of your day. And as always, hopefully you can be more hopeful about the future and how you can contribute to a more beneficial place that we can all be a part of. But as we're thinking about 2023, Chris and I were thinking, all right, how do we help people live a more meaningful life? What topics should we discuss? What ideas might help? And we keep coming back to the idea of rituals. And we have both read this book, and some of our leadership team have read this book. We've already hopefully promoted, and you've heard about the book from Stasha Sagan, For Small Creatures Such as We. And it's essentially a book focused on what are some rituals or essentially habits or things that we can be participating in throughout the year that would help us live a more meaningful life. So that book's been on our brain. So what we wanted to do as we're kicking off our first kind of conversation is to have a discussion with Kent Dobson today on the topic of rituals. You were the first person, Kent, that came to mind we didn't really have a backup. So I'm really glad that you said yes to having this discussion. But the first person that came to mind when we're thinking of like, all right, what's somebody that might have something interesting to say about rituals? So for those people that are listening, I'm not sure if you even like how you would even like what comes to mind. How do you fill the definition of the word ritual? So we wanted to kind of make this a very simple start to our discussion and make this kind of a rituals 101 for those of you that are listening and you're like, I don't even know what a ritual is. And that's like a word that I don't use very often. Kristen, what are you thinking when I'm saying all this stuff?
Well, before we get to Kent, I think I also wanted to add to what you just said, which is, we've kind of announced we're not going to go back to this like somewhat regular Sunday morning gatherings, that we're kind of looking to forge kind of a new model of what church and community can be. And I think part of that speaks to this ritual conversation in that for many of us, we understood ritual just within a Christian context of church gathering. And so for me, my history with ritual is I understand ritual to be communion, worship, baptism, and all the things that were kind of packaged within this church environment. And so I think what the conversation we're having is that, can we expand that view? And was that view small to begin with? And so I think I agree with what Peter said. We were really interested to have Kent kind of kick off this conversation with us to kind of have a deeper, more expanded view, or even maybe in some cases a simpler view. I don't know. Let's see where it takes us. But Kent, we're really glad that you're here to help us have this conversation to kick off the year.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, this is something that's sort of in my wheelhouse of interest. And, like the two of you, I have some experience in Christian religious communities and the kind of ritual associations and rhythms that are part of that. And also I've been out of that. So I've had in and out of that world. But more recently, just the deep structure of how human beings experience a meaningful life has been what I've been after, really. And not only just personally, but it's a communal question, and ritual is a communal question, really, in my opinion. I suppose when you could imagine a kind of privatized ritual life, and that's true. I mean, everyone has patterns, and it'll be interesting to see what happens with Eastlake if you say, okay, we're not going to do our regular Sunday morning thing. So I would say, well, what's going to happen? Because part of the attractive energy is in fact the pattern, the rhythm, the routine, and people feel its absence when it's not there. And but it's interesting terrain to be exploring right now, and we almost have to, because media culture, mass consumer culture is filling the space. It's filling the ritual space. So now I haven't really said what I mean by ritual yet, but I'll try to maybe work into that. But and feel free to interrupt me or ask for clarification. That won't bother me. But
I already have one.
Okay, yeah, you can hit me with a question. Then I'll try to define.
Yeah, no, I love that. Even what you're saying, like kind of feeling like we have to, because that's partly where we're treading the waters we're treading in 23 is doing essentially these kinds of pieces online and providing content, doing some things in person still. So there'll be like events and ways to get together, but the model and the community just doesn't seem to make sense to do essentially 40 Sunday morning services anymore, given the makeup of the community, the makeup of how donations operate. Like that model just doesn't function in the same way that it did a decade ago for Eastlake. It might still for other communities, but in this one it doesn't. And so when you say things like the media has filled some of the ritual space, I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are there. Like, what do you mean by that? Are you meaning just podcasts in general, or what kind of media comes to your mind?
Well, I was thinking about the Starbucks cup, that appears in somewhere in October or November that tells us that Christmas is coming. you know, this
Yes.
change white to red, and you're like, oh my God, you know. But actually most of that is unconscious, and there's a shift, you know, there's a shift that's happening, and people can feel the shift like just in the earth rhythms themselves. And so that's what I mean by culture. It's taking these things and saying, we're going to play into this space. I'm not even saying they're doing it on purpose, but maybe they are, but we're going to play into this space here. And we're going to provide patterns of meaning that are going to connect you to, you know, to sentimentality, but also just to the rhythms of nature, and also to the relationship between buying something and meaning. That's partly what I mean by consumer culture. It says, okay, we know how this game works. Meaning is bought. And so we're going to sell you a vibe. I mean, like let's just take Starbucks, for example. In some sort of critical taste test, it's not necessarily the best coffee. That's not what people are interested in, really. They're interested in the vibe of being in the place, or the rhythm of buying it every day, and, you know, that kind of thing.
I'm pretty sure Starbucks is doing it on purpose. Because I don't buy Starbucks except for at Christmas time. They totally got me. I'm like, the cups. It's time.
Yeah, and I got some Starbucks gift cards. This episode is brought to you by Starbucks.
Clearly,
no, but I got some gift cards and I'm excited. You know, I'm like, yes, you know, here we go. Yeah, and I mean, maybe we don't need to say more than that, because I think people can use their imagination for ways in which consumer culture is filling those spaces. Okay, so I wanted to try to say some really simple things about how rituals came to be and what they are. First of all, you can hear the word rite, as in rite of passage, inside ritual. That's probably in the book that you're suggesting. I didn't read the book, but that means like some kind of regular, I would use the word play, like a theater, like a kind of enactment of something, some sort of regular routine enactment. That's a rite. And a ritual is, you know, little rites or big rites, little rites of passage, or and okay, so more could be said about that, but I think the question of how they got formed is where I have some, I guess this is more of my opinion. So I think two things are important. That meaning, part of how we experience meaning as human beings, is that we experience our life being rooted in something larger. That's like what I would think of as meaning with a capital M. People feel and it's a felt, somatic, intellectual, spiritual, full-bodied experience of meaning when we're connected to something larger. You know, it's like, and anything could apply to that. You have your first child and you're like, this is not about me. Well, what's it about? It's something larger, you know. Or like the classic, you know, you go to your first concert of your favorite band and everybody's singing the song, you know, that's a kind of ritual. But what's working about it is that it's connecting you to something larger, even if it's, you know, Coldplay. You know, it's still bigger.
Even if it's Coldplay?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I just meant like, that's not the Pope. That's not the Pope. You know, correct, I love it. Correct. And I think people who claim that they hate Coldplay, it's a shadow claim. Deep inside, they want to stand there and just say it's all yellow.
Come on. You know? It's all yellow, right? How do you resist?
So anyway, so I don't think an effective ritual, there's no such thing as an effective ritual that doesn't connect us to something larger. Because, and without an experience of something larger, then we kind of despair or become narcissists. You know, it's like, if that's a kind of existential turn. There's nothing more meaningful, or everything is meaningless. You can despair, or you can turn into a narcissist. Maybe two more, you know, swing back and forth, something like that. And I would say the other part to this goes something like this, that the larger or the transcendent is also too much for us to bear. So we need meaning, we need experiences of meaning, but it's also too much. It's like why in the Bible you can't, Moses can't look at the face of God or he'll die. Well, why not? Isn't God your buddy? Be like, hey man, let's go out for a beer. Let's get some Starbucks, but it's not like that. The transcendent, the truly mysterious is, has a sort of frightening dimension to it and can be too much to bear, can overwhelm you. So a ritual says we'll provide enough of a container. So we can feel part of something larger, but also not be overwhelmed. So anyway, that's kind of the problem that I think rituals are trying to respond to. And they don't get created like, you don't workshop a ritual like, hey guys, let's, what should we do next week, to celebrate the solstice, and I don't know, this and this. They just kind of emerge. They emerge as people experience, I don't know what you would call it, like numinous encounters, mysteries, places, it's the summer solstice and the mountain light falls a certain way in the valley and it's kind of magical. And that becomes a place that people start gathering and they start adding to how can we enhance our participation in this mystery and not get too close to it, but close enough where we can sort of taste what's meaningful. Have I made sense so far? Questions? Like, what do you think?
Two things. When I think of the summer solstice, all I think about is naked bike riders in Fremont, because that is one of the things that happens here.
That was one they workshopped. That's a workshop ritual.
They workshopped.
Maybe that emerged.
But that was one of my questions. What you said is, but can it be workshopped? Can you kind of say, how do I want to celebrate the summer solstice or the winter solstice? How do I want to celebrate? Like, can we be intentional about remembering things through ritual or developing our own?
Yeah, I guess I'll give a kind of non-answer, which is sort of like yes and no. Yeah. Like, yes, I think we can bring our conscious, sophisticated 21st century mind to bear. And we have to, in a way, because part of what's happening in the 21st century is rituals are losing their meaning for people. And that's partly just because they get old after a while, you could say, but it's also part of the scientific mind and the kind of obsession with scientific rationalism. And we say, well, these don't work, what are these magic spells or something? So, and we can't get out of that. It's hard to get out of that. And I'm not even saying we should necessarily, but yeah, so I guess you can start to wonder, well, can we create new expressions of things? But on the other hand, the most meaningful rituals are meaningful because you don't make them up. Otherwise, the ego's in your own personal ego is in charge, or the ego of your guru, or your leader, and what they cooked up 25 minutes ago. And, but when you're in the presence of something that, I'll give you a weird example. So there's this, there's this event that happens every year in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. So this is the main church in the heart of Jerusalem. And this is an Orthodox church thing. So, and it's called something like the Holy Fire. All right. And so what happens is that the priests go into the chamber, into the innermost realm of the chamber, and with a torch, and they claim that the spirit lights the fire, and then they bring it out, and then it gets passed around, and people all have candles, and they all kind of try to cram into the church, and sometimes there are fights and all kinds of other like crazy things that happen. It's a very non-Western kind of tradition. But then it sort of spreads through the whole church and then through all the streets of Jerusalem, who's ever a part of the festival. They're trying to pass on this light. Now, you could never make that up or compete with that if you're just going to like, hey, this year, we're going to do a ritual, and we're going to, you just can't compete with that, because how did that get formed? I don't even know, but it's something like 1700 years old, and it is meaningful. Now, to what does it point? That's the realm of theology. Does it point to something that's true? Does it connect people to meaning, and what kind of meaning? But it definitely works. It's and that kind of thing. Like, speaking of Coldplay, it's a tradition now. Now people use their phones, but they're holding up their lights. And where did that come from? In part, it came from what I'm describing in the Greek Orthodox Church. It's a religious act that symbolizes light entering darkness. And that's like a deep human craving. And that's where I say it's probably more, if I took you there to this thing, you'd be like, oh my God, this is insane,
Yeah.
So anyway.
That makes sense. I heard you say, yes, you could, but it seems as if the most meaningful or impactful ones emerge, right? They're ones that came out of an experience. They're ones that came out of an experience thousands of years ago that we can, again, pull ourselves or feel a part of, not only our current people, but I can feel connected. Like, I'm imagining being a part of that. It's not just I'm connected to this candle lighting in Jerusalem today. I'm connected to people for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years who've done this every year, right? My family, my great-great-grandpa, I don't even remember his name, but I know he did this tradition. And that is obviously a lot more significant than something Kristen and I brainstorm on this call right now.
Yeah. Okay. Here's something else that's coming up for me as you're speaking. Well, do rituals have patterns? Like, that's the question that I'm interested, because I'm into comparative religion and other kinds of spirituality and things like this. So I want to say, well, what patterns are present across religious traditions or even non-religious traditions? And here are the big ones. Birth. Birth needs rituals. Death. Transitional spaces like coming of age things, or illness sometimes. And then for our ancestors, and this is probably partly why we feel so empty, why our rituals feel empty. For our ancestors, it involved the earth. It involved the seasons as that's the main orientation for almost all rituals. Even birth and death, you could fit into, a cyclical, seasonal, earth-based frame. So, and well, that gives you a clue. So even if you're going to consider, well, are there contemporary, modern, 21st century expressions of ritual? Yeah, probably. But if they're not in conversation with the seasons, and with the big rites of passage as human beings, like birth and death and marriage and divorce, you could say now. And I mean, wouldn't it be amazing? Divorce, I don't know what your community is like, but for people my age, it's like, it's the norm, not the exception now. The loss of long-term intimate relationships is the norm. And so we probably need rituals for that, ending as much as beginning. And because I think it's become almost like normalized, like, well, if this happens, shit happens, and go to your personal therapist and kind of work things out, when it really calls for communal rituals that involve grief and loss and longing and perhaps new possibilities. And yeah, that's a realm that needs some creative attention, you could say. So my main seasonal connection and like the rites of passage as human beings, those are the ritual spaces that I think are most meaningful for people.
Hey everyone, it's Kristen. Just wanted to take a moment to say thank you for tuning in. I hope that you're finding these messages helpful for you in your everyday life. That's what we're trying to do here, is gather around the idea that life is a gift and love is the point, and let's give ourselves ways to move forward in that in our own everyday world. So I wanted to take a moment to say thank you for being a part of this community. To those of you who have participated and given financially, we want to say thank you to you. Everything that we do here happens because people make contributions. People say, I value this place, I want it to exist for me and for other people, and so I'm going to support it. And so we just want to say how grateful we are that you do that. And for those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to contribute yet, we would ask you to consider maybe doing so. If you find this place beneficial, if you find these messages helpful for you, then consider joining us in that way. You could go to eastlakecc.com to make a contribution, and we just always are thankful for the people who want this place to exist. So thanks again for tuning in. Let's get back to the message.
I guess it's interesting because I was thinking about how much the seasons are viewed differently today than they were even 100 years or 200 years ago. So the seasons, Chris and I had a discussion about how, and this came up in the book, right? The first strawberry of spring felt a lot different than the first strawberry of, like, there's no first strawberry of spring in my life, right? I can have a strawberry today. It's January. And it might not be the best tasting strawberry, and I didn't grow it, but I can have access to it. And even just the idea of light, like I have in my home, I have ongoing kind of teasing discussions with my mom and my sister. They like the house darker than I do, and I just like it bright. I want more light on. I want it on until I go to bed, and then it's all off. But I don't want to like conserve certain sections of the house with light. I want more light, and I was thinking that is just a modern privilege, right? Like, you, in some ways, the seasons, or I would imagine the rituals helped kind of move people through the seasons, and I don't know if I need some of those rituals as much because I can, of our modern conveniences, if that makes sense. I don't need the hope of the new light or the longer day as much as I would have maybe wanted that ritual in January or in December when it was so dark and I was knowing that I had darkness in front of me for 2 more months, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 And I was wondering if that's not a form of impoverishment, if some element of the soul isn't impoverished because of our advances, so to speak,
Right. Yeah. Not a privilege as much as a detriment.
Yeah. I just wonder, I mean, that might not be true for all people, but there is a sense where the modern world creates sameness. Like you're describing, you can have the light can be constant in your house, the temperature can be constant in your house, your days can be consistent. Even the idea of like the work rhythm, there's no work rhythm. It's just like you're working and you're not working, and it just boom, It's all flat. Maybe you get a vacation in there, but mostly it's just a flat life. And that's not how we evolved. 100%, that's not how we evolved. And so you wonder why people feel so much despair. It's like, this doesn't make sense. And probably why we're drawn to go to church, even if we don't even believe the stuff that's being said. It's like it breaks the monotony, and it says, okay, well, we're talking about Matthew, some ancient book on a Sunday, and I'm going to go there or whatever. I'm going to tune in, and there it is, and it's breaking the monotony and reminding me of something else. And so maybe we should go a little bit further with the seasons, because what I kind of hear you saying in the background is, maybe you're not saying it, but I guess it's just bringing it up for me. All right, maybe that world is gone. I know
That's so interesting, because I was just thinking, maybe it's recognizing that world is still here.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, well, that would be more my intuition too. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and that the ritual, like provides the container to recognize what always has been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was thinking, I just wanted to say, I'm just stuck on what you said earlier about how the container, because what is larger and meaningful is too much. Sometimes that was really powerful to me. And I think, like, the things that you just said, birth and death and divorce and coming of age, they're too much. And I think I'm thankful for your perspective on that, because I think that's why we crave the rituals, to try to get through the too much.
That's right.
To make it graspable or tangible or able to be held, I think is what we're trying to do, because we want the meaningful part of it, but the meaning can just be too overwhelming. So I think what I'm hearing you say, or what you said sparked in me, was just, I have that need to like grasp how powerful birth is, but then I can't, it's too much, and it's too much to experience. So having little fragmented things to help me understand it is part of being able to even experience it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. It incarnates what is essentially mysterious in palatable forms. That's why I was, when I was talking about a rite as a kind of play, it lets you play inside the space, but has enough form and structure that you're not overwhelmed. Like all of a sudden I had this image, like when my dad died a few years ago, and there was all this talk about what the funerals should be like and the service and all this kind of stuff. And that's complicated. That's really complicated terrain for anyone that's had a loved one that's passed away, because, you know, it's obviously not about them. At a certain point, they're gone. So you have like all these like expectations, and I could feel that I didn't have many when it came to the public service, but I had this feeling that at the graveside, I wanted to throw dirt on the coffin. And my dad was buried in this kind of terrible modern way, where they're just like putting you in a concrete box. Essentially, it's very modern. There's something wrong about it. And even like, just to take a little side detour, a friend of mine died when I was living in Israel, when I was a student. He was also in Israel too, and the church that I went to asked for volunteers to dig the grave, you know, like, hey, you know, Phil died this week. We need some extra hands. You know, does anyone have a pickaxe? Stuff like that. The ground's pretty hard. And literally the community dug the grave. They took the body in a Volkswagen bus from the morgue to the gravesite, wrapped him up in a cloth, put an American flag over him because he served in Vietnam, and lowered him down with ropes. Like, you don't see that anymore, you know. But anyway, I can feel myself getting emotional about that. It's like, God, that's a ritual, you know. And we rob people of that kind of meaning when it's so cleaned up.
Like,
don't
so much less human.
Leave it all behind closed doors, so you don't have to see anything except the prettied up chemical filled body, you know, with makeup, and that's and then everything else is being pretty. So anyway, I just had this feeling like, at the very least, I want to throw dirt on the coffin. And it was amazing. It was like the best moment. And my nephew, he was like into it, like, kind of funny too, because he's like a couple of handfuls in there, you know. But that was gave me a window into, in a way, now that I'm thinking of it now, why ritual connects us to a sense of the transcendent. Like, it's not about me. It's also about my nephew. It's about the deceased. There's a continuation here. And that's where I'm going to go. From dust you came, to dust you shall return. You know, that's going to be me in like 5 seconds. But yeah, and so we need that stuff. Otherwise, I don't know, a Facebook post about someone that died is just not going to cut it.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. That's such a meaningful example. I'm curious, even as I'm hearing you share that, do you feel like that version of a death ritual, is that modern day? Is that American, or a combination of like America's or modern day, like trying to prevent the experience? Like, how do you think we got to the place where it be like that death ritual is like kind of taken away from the human and get outsourced to a business? That sounds pretty American, but
yeah, I don't know. I mean, this would be probably something I shouldn't riff on too much, because
sure. And I'm not trying to
yeah,
make it.
people are doing the best they can, and
Sure.
given the loss of community and culture that's happening, it wasn't that long ago that when you died, if you're religious, the community really was much more part of it, and you were buried in the church graveyard for that matter. So
Right.
that world is pretty much gone. But I mean, I think there is a strong denial of death meme and theme in our current world. It's like we don't know what to do with it, so we deny that it happens, and some of that is theological. It's like, don't worry, they're playing soccer with the Lord or whatever, and that doesn't quite sound right to most of us, but that's a kind of denial of death. And even I'm not against people having hope in an afterlife. I'm really not, and whether or not you believe in that, but it's like it does help us keep at arm's length from what's called in the Bible gathering to your ancestors, being gathered to your fathers and mothers. And they meant that literally. They literally put all the bones in the same tomb. So when you buried grandma, you saw your great grandparents' bones still there, and you knew that's where you're going to go. And that's meaningful. That is really meaningful. And you can't make that up, yeah.
I was going to take it a direction, Kristen. Do you have a thought, or do you want? I don't want to just keep going my path. I want to make sure that I'm giving space for wherever your brain's going.
No, I'm just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to what I feel like you two were both speaking to, because maybe I didn't quite fully grasp it. Because Kristen mentioned like some of the ritual pointing to the world that's always been there, and Kent, you said like maybe that world doesn't exist anymore. If you think about it, like, and part of it I think is and part of this discussion is what's the role of ritual today, and what maybe prevents us. If you think about even the examples I gave about light or sameness, what kind of gets in the way of us adopting ritual, like given the conversations that you have and the people in your life. I think part of why I'm wanting to have discussion on ritual is like I'm not sure I'm as intentional as I was in years past in marking the seasons, and I kind of just let the church do that on my behalf, and I followed those rituals, and I felt like I kind of checked the box of yay, I have my rhythms, whether they were meaningful or not, whether I thought about them or not, but at least I was doing something. And I feel like as I've moved worldview wise away from just following Christianity as my, as the curriculum for my ritual life, maybe I'm less intentional in kind of forming my own. So I'm curious, maybe to pivot the discussion towards how do you have examples in your life of people who are really intentional with their rituals? Do you feel like you personally would say that like you have a couple of rituals that you're like, these are really meaningful to me? Or I'm kind of just curious your thoughts on like, how do we adopt this more, or how do we get more intentional about this in 2023?
Yeah, it's tough because I'm a lot better at theorizing and spinning tales and myths and connecting things in the web.
That's okay. If you're like, I'm not sure how to answer that one, it's okay for you that to be your answer. We're gonna keep digging at this all year.
I would say I have a hunger. So I have a hunger for, I know left to my own devices, I'm likely to get stuck in cul-de-sacs and dead ends. And so I'm attracted to ritual. And sometimes I think about rituals as having two faces. One is the big stuff, kind of like what we've been talking about up to this point, and the other is kind of the daily piece. And I would really put the daily piece more, at least in my view, like in the realm of prayer, like in the largest sense of that word. What's a daily way of reorienting? Because I would think about prayer as the same way. It's a kind of ritual where it's connecting us to the transcendent. And addicts know this pretty well. I don't know if you read Russell Brand's book on addiction, but one of the things I I got from him, and I kind of feel that I feel myself craving this sort of thing, is he starts every day with very specific rituals. Like, well, now he does an ice bath, but let's say he does an ice bath. He lights these candles. He starts with a prayer that's something like, I'm an addict and I'm in need of help, and he goes about his day. And that's not nothing. That's, first of all, maybe it's a little bit of freestyle. Like, he's a kind of spiritually fluid person, you could say. I mean, I don't know how you would describe his spirituality, but the actual acts, like lighting a candle, saying a specific prayer, those are old. Those are as old as any religion on earth. So, yeah, I have some daily practices that have a little more to do with reading and a kind of certain way of reading. I learned from the Dominican sisters, initially Lectio Divina. Maybe you've talked about it at Eastlake, I don't know, but sort of the divine reading is what it means. But it's like you read a certain way as to listen to a word or a phrase and just allow what I now would call the unconscious to be involved, or the spirit, in this. Not reading for information, because I'm really good at that. But if I can shift toward, I'm going to listen differently, and as an act of submission in a way, because again, we're talking about the transcendent. It's not I'm not in control. I'm not in control of even my own life, really. So some kind of daily way of listening and speaking. I'm not that great at prayer. That it makes me a little uncomfortable, like if you were to ask me to pray right now, I'd be like, no, thanks. But
I get that.
Yeah, I probably do more than my hangups, but I feel the need for it, and sometimes I do. Sometimes it's really that simple, and that's a daily ritual. And then the other stuff is like, I went to an Advent service that the Dominicans put on this year. That was new for me. Like, I went to a kind of religious organization, and did 4 weeks of Advent. I don't know why, because I wanted to. And also because I didn't have to make it up, When you're in the religious business, like giving talks, and it's very hard to take your own medicine, because you know what's in the medicine. So it's like, and when you're hosting something, it's different than participating. So I do try to look at the year a little bit and say, what are the big markers? Like for me, for my family, a family one is Thanksgiving. We have turned Thanksgiving into the major holiday that we celebrate, not that we dress up like pilgrims and native people. No, I just mean like we put time and money and effort, and we like it, and we light candles, and we invite people, and we say yes to it. And partly why it works is because it's cultural, but also seasonal. It feels like the right time of year. Our body, the deep body says yes to it. It's like, yeah, finally, it's time to eat squash, because that's when it's ready. That's right. Why. And even if we're not that aware of it.
What made you land on Thanksgiving? And what when you say family, like, how do you involve, like, what does that look like? Just for an example for somebody listening. Inviting, is that like Friendsgiving kind of thing? Is it broader community?
No, I don't do that. I don't have my house is not an open door.
That's great. That's what I'm kind of curious.
Like that. No, I mean it. My wife, my kids, my extended immediate family that lives here. This year, her brothers came up from Georgia, and so yeah, we try to say yes and open our doors. Yeah. And we like it. We like cooking. We like doing it. And it's almost better. Maybe this might be back to the simple expressions of rituals. It's hard to say if they're good or bad, like, do we bring moral categories? But I do know that when you consent and say yes, then it tends to grow in its capacity to help us experience meaning. And we know this as kids, like when you're half-heartedly going to some Christmas Eve service, all right, that's what you're going to get out of it. Fine. All right, do that. But if you're going to do it, then do it and say, all try to open to something larger. This is not about me. And I don't know why Thanksgiving too. It's also seems like very, very little of life do we say, I can't believe I'm still alive. And I didn't make all this food. And how did I even end up here? At least it's supposed to help point toward that. Yeah.
Beautiful.
I've got one more actually, because, okay. So another thing that, I lead wilderness programs and things like this. And one of the practices is a kind of form of an ancient ritual, which is the vision fast, which is fasting alone in the wilderness for a few days. It's part of the core curriculum at Animas Valley Institute, where I've done all my guide training and stuff. And so I think, what is that? What is a vision fast? It's not a yearly ritual necessarily. I mean, although you have religious traditions that fast, it's one of those archetypal passages. Maybe originally it was for young people or transitional. It's a transitional space. It says, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, or I'm none sure, or I have this deep longing I can't quite connect with, but there's so much input and noise and volume and food and alcohol and drugs and that I can't get close to it. So the vision fast, which exists in every culture that I know of, some version of it exists. They might not call it vision, but it's something like that, And so you say no, because I can feel that I'm going to need another one soon. I've done a couple of them, but I can feel that. I'm like, I'm going to need another one soon. And that's going to take a year or so of preparation, really. Not that I'm going to be doing it every day, but just like, yeah, all right, this is coming. And I'm going to say yes to it. And then it's the self-emptying. That's the fast, You empty yourself so that for the possibility of being filled by God, mystery, nature, the unknown, not my phone, and certainly not Twitter and what it says is important. That is not important. And we know that in a deep way. So that's an example of a ritual that communities have held that I think can be revived. And it's also not particularly embedded in any religious tradition. So go on a vision fast, You don't have to do it with Animus. You can do self-designed versions of these things. It's sometimes best to involve a few people where there's a context for sharing what may or may not happen from something like this. But anyway, that's like an example of a ritual, and that's been important for me, and it will be as I approach these little times where I'm just not sure what's next. So
it's a great example.
I have a very random modern day comment. Okay. So I saw this happened to me, and then I saw it on social media, and I was like, yes, thank you, someone, for pointing this out. I had a moment when I was buying clothes for my kids at Target for my son, who's the oldest. And there's a moment where I had to move. And the ritual that they pointed out on social media was crossing the aisle, where you leave the baby clothes and you have to cross the aisle and go to the big kid clothes. And I had a moment where I was teary in Target because my son was bigger than a 5T. So off I went, crossed the aisle. And then I didn't recognize what was happening really to me. I just was sad for a moment. And then I saw this thing on social media that was like the moms when you cross the aisle at Target, and how this is like a moment where you don't have a baby anymore, you have a kid. And I think for me, there was something there of like, I needed some help to recognize what was happening, which was, I don't know, maybe this is like a coming of age thing in a small sense for my boy, of like, he's not a baby, he's now a boy. And I don't know what then comes after that. But I was just kind of, as you were talking about some of these like deeper things, I think part for me, I really appreciated the help noticing the everyday things that are already happening. And so I think I would just wanted to put that out there to both of you, and just to say, like, I don't know why that was really meaningful for me, that someone gave me a context for why I was emotional when I had to cross the aisle.
Yeah. I love that story.
Great example.
And imagine if we lived in a village where something other than a social media post deepened that kind of natural progression, because what's happening? Grief. You can never get that back. Never.
Yeah.
It's done. You're offering your child to the world now in a different way. And that's what ancient cultures were really good at. They were really good at that's what the village elders were for. And there were rites and rituals for all that kind of stuff. And it's sad. It's sad. It's sad that it's lost. And maybe to answer both of you are poking around in this, like, is it just over or is it not over? Is like, can we go back? Can we not go back?
Yeah. Can we create them again? Right. Who's going to be the elders that didn't those guys brainstorm it?
See, I think one reason why they will never go away is because they're rooted in nature.
Yeah.
Now, the 24-hour lights on cycle, it's a facade. I mean, it's actually happening, but it's a facade. It's masking the fact that
the reality.
Coal is being burned to make that happen. Or in your part of the world, it's probably water. It's probably dams, hydroelectric. It masks that it's costing us something, and that won't last forever. Nature wins. It always wins, and it will break us from our malaise eventually. I'm not being even too apocalyptic. I'm saying even the human spirit will eventually say no. I think that's going to happen with the metaverse. The human soul is not incarnated in a virtual realm. So eventually people will just say, fuck it, I'm out here, or something like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not just saying that because I'm a Gen Xer and that's what we normally say about it. I believe in the human spirit, and I believe in nature. I believe that it's like you'll cross the aisle in Target, in your metaverse Target, and then you'll feel that,
Yeah.
Well, and it's you can't, it's just, I'm going to feel that somewhere. The loss of my baby and the losing of time, or the feelings of being proud of having a growing child, like all those things, those all happen. But it is a little bit sad that it's just like me standing in the aisle by myself having that vision.
Imagine this. This happened at a Target in Rome. All right. So you and I are at the Target in Rome. There's no Target in Rome. We're using our imagination here. And you have this feeling and you say to me, oh, I don't know why I'm crying. I just crossed the aisle. And I said, oh, I have an idea. Let's go to the Vatican. So we go to the Vatican and we walk in the front door of the Sistine Chapel. And to the right, there's Michelangelo's Pieta, which is the marble statue of Mary holding Jesus. Yeah. And then we would light a candle. Yeah. And we'd know that life is that short. And we know it's that meaningful, It's like I don't know, it's like you give your kids away. You're like, God. See, that's what I mean. Like, I don't know when Michelangelo lived, but that was a while ago. And the Vatican's been standing there a while, and that would enhance our experience of being part of something larger. And that's why I don't think, I don't know. I think religion is changing. I don't know what's exactly happening. It's kind of dissolving on the one hand, and, I don't know. People are clinging on the other hand. But I would mourn the day the Vatican got turned into hip apartments, Be like,
Yeah.
it's over, and someone will tear that down and say, we can't live like this. So to answer your question, yeah, collectively, communally, maybe from the deep unconscious, rituals will continue to, I think, provide some shape.
Yeah.
And it's the other forms, we haven't talked about this, but it's like ideological fervor is taking the place of those maps, like, meaning I'm a part of some political party or group, or, it's that religious instinct, which is kind of what it is for meaning. It's like we're just given these cheaper versions of it, be a part of the red state or the blue state, and
Feels like
it's just,
sports teams check some of those boxes too, right? Like if you think about, I'm a Ohio State Buckeye fan, right? It's like this tribal identity, and it like there's the rituals, there's the routine, there's all the sun. I show up on Saturday, I go do like there's so much like ritualistic behavior in there that I think it's a modern version of it, but it kind of is void of the soul for the most. Although maybe some, I don't know, like then that starts to get pretty subjective, right? Because there's probably some that would say it's spiritual.
well, it is spiritual. It is spiritual in a way, but it's just thin,
Yeah.
It's like,
Yeah.
and it's kind of accidental. Like, why do I like Michigan? Because that's where I live. I mean,
Yeah.
that's all.
Sorry to bring up Ohio
Yeah.
State. My apologies. That was a mistake.
Sorry about that loss the other
I'm
day.
ending this. But part of us knows it's just accidental. It's kind of true with religion too. Like, why am I a Christian? I'm like, well, it's my zip code in part.
Yeah.
My family heritage that I didn't choose. And but sports is just a thin version. Someday I want to go and watch a Liverpool match and and stand there and sing the opening song. I mean, I'll it'll be emotional, but I'll also know part of me is like, all right, it's
a game.
It's just a game with millions of dollars.
Yeah.
Billions,
Yeah.
actually.
I love what you've shared. I think as we're wrapping, Kristen, I had a couple some of my biggest takeaways from your thoughts. Ken, thank you for sharing these, first of all.
Yeah.
Always find you insightful, and you're such a teacher for our community. You've been so for a long time, and for me personally. So I hope you hear that. Like, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Some of my biggest takeaways today was just being reminded of how critical, like a meaningful life is found first and foremost in connecting to something larger, and how rituals help facilitate that. I thought that was just obviously basic and 101 when it comes to rituals, but for those of us that are listening, like that is, if you're feeling like, man, I want a more meaningful life, it's going to be found through connecting to something bigger, right? And there's a lot of things that are bigger than just ourselves individually, but I found that helpful. And then I also find some of your thoughts just on how rituals aren't going away. They might be shifting, they might be changing, but that's a part of the human impulse. The human impulse will always be to, I think, connect to something larger, and that those routines or those, obviously I'm just looking for a different word for rituals. Essentially the rituals that stick around are the ones that connect us to something larger, and how critical those are to our flourishing. And so I just appreciate your thoughts on that. Did you have big takeaways, KB?
I'm still emotional about Target.
I know that made you cry.
Target in
Which is
Rome.
good. It was beautiful.
It made myself cry.
Yeah. I can't believe they put that
No.
Target up. I'm so glad they put it next to the Vatican.
No, thanks, Kent. Thanks for the way that you bring meaning to things and make us think. I really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any closing thoughts before we wrap? I think it was really helpful kind of kick off to the year when we think through rituals. It's okay if you don't. You've shared all you got, but if there's anything you feel like you missed, we want to give you a little window too.
Not really. I just Here's a line from Thomas Merton. He said of the desert fathers and mothers, which he kind of helped recover for the modern world. He was reading all these strange mystics, 3rd century, 4th century mystics. And anyway, he said, for the desert fathers and mothers, he said, society is a shipwreck from which we must swim for our lives. And I think we're in that kind of place. And I don't even mean that in an apocalyptic way or to be against Starbucks or something like that. I just mean in terms of its meaning systems, it's a shipwreck. And so we got to swim. And part of the swimming is, religious communities, spiritual communities, just families, individuals, wrestling with all the things we're talking about. Like, okay, well, where is meaning and how can we connect to it? And that's where I think ritual provides a kind of on-ramp, or you could say an off-ramp from society, so we can do a U-turn and swim in the opposite direction. And really is going to take that. I think one of the things that evangelicalism got wrong is that, and maybe just modern Christianity in general, it said, hey, let's just keep living the same life we have, and then we'll sprinkle some Jesus in there and we'll call it good. It doesn't work. It's like the deep structure of meaning of a consumeristic culture, you could say. And I'm not even against all things like that. I just mean the beast that runs the machine is antithetical to the deeper sources of truth and meaning. And so you need off ramps, and you got to swim in the opposite direction. And having a daily ritual, even like, to make it simple, taking an ice bath and lighting that candle and say, I'm not in charge. That is swimming in the opposite direction, rather than checking your phone and saying, I'm going to allow an algorithm to tell me what's important. That's handing over your life. And who would want to do that? I don't want to do that, even though it's like fun, It's so maybe that's a place to land.
I think it's a great place to land. Thanks for sharing, Kent. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.